Morning, ladies and gentlemen, for the third time. Welcome to this next part of the programme, and I'm welcoming you on behalf of the Urology Foundation. Now, the Urology Foundation Research Scholarship Medal is awarded to the most outstanding application to TUF's Research Scholarship Programme, as judged by the Scientific and Education Committee and Review Committee. And this year, the award is presented to Prasanna Sooriakumaran, otherwise known as PS, who's from Oxford, for his project entitled Testing Radical Prostatectomy in Men with Prostate Cancer and Oligometastases to the Bone, a randomized controlled feasibility study. Well done, PS. And now moving to the Urology Foundation lecture. This year, the TUF lecture is given by Tony Giddings. Tony was a consultant in general and vascular surgery at the Royal Surrey County Hospital and then King's. Since retiring from clinical practice, he's worked virtually full-time in the fields of patient safety, safety science, and medical performance. Recent projects include films, teaching commitments, work with the Department of Health on the duty of candour, and further support for the Clinical Human Factors Group. No doubt his talk will provide some thoughtful and provocative insights into ongoing search for safer surgery. Thank you, Tony.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. We all are different, but we all share one important characteristic, and that's the original Mark I human brain. And in my talk, I want to talk a little bit about some of the applications to safety that has. I want to actually share with you some of my personal heroes. And I'm going to ask one of them, Mark de Laval, a retired cardiac surgeon from Great Ormond Street, with whom I was privileged to do some research, to just tell us what the key to this talk is.
The teams with the best outcomes are not necessarily those who make fewer errors. What we have to do is to establish systems in healthcare, even in high-risk areas, where the outcomes remain good in spite of being performed by human beings who are fallible.
I'm going to try to ask 5 questions and give some answers. Where are we now and how did we get here? Why do the best surgeons make the worst mistakes? And by best surgeons, I mean the most experienced. And by worst mistakes, I mean avoidable. What works and why don't we use it? What leadership is required and what can you do tomorrow? Where are we now? Well, we've come a long way since the origin of the NHS.
It exists everywhere. A study in the United States suggests that medical errors kill more people each year than do road traffic accidents, workplace accidents, and AIDS.
Well, that's the opinion of Jim Reason, who is a world expert. And I'd like to just touch on a couple of examples. We can think of nothing more critically important than the safety of the mother and her baby, particularly during childbirth. And yet, when we look at obstetric care, the National Health Service Litigation Authority in 2012 looked at 10 years of tragedies and formed the conclusion that, unfortunately, many of the same errors are being repeated. Now, that might suggest we're not improving. But of course, we are improving. It's just that with the advancement of technologies, new drugs, new treatments, new procedures, the menu for risk and for error is increasing every day. We've made progress in certain areas due to focused programs. For example, the ATLS program, the Central Line Improvement program. But we can't have a program for every risk. We therefore need carefully to look for generic solutions which apply to all aspects of medical care. And one of those generic areas is the way we behave, our safety-conscious behavior, the non-technical skills. Where are we with that? Well, the paper published from the Edinburgh group this year showed the results from their close observation of 51 procedures in general and vascular surgery, where there were 90 significant incidents, of which 63% were avoidable. And the errors were those of situation awareness or perception, communications and teamwork, and leadership. And these errors have been known for a very long time. Now, how did we get here? And here I want to just quickly run through the menu of things that were important in the generation of today's health service, from the political origins, where we had vision, but there was no financial plan, through the IMF intervention, through Thatcher's competition, through Blair's investment in productivity without investing in quality, and through the scandals that we've endured, where the GMC made a very unintelligent report and Kennedy a landmark scientifically based report, the Mid-Staffordshire inquiry, on which I was privileged to serve, the parliamentary inquiry, where I was a specialist advisor, which again was a very scientifically orientated answer, and of course the recent conservative legislation, the turbulence from which we are still not able to say is ended. Throughout this saga, productivity and the money has always featured more heavily than safety. Now, why do the best, the most experienced surgeons make the worst mistakes? I've chosen 4 topics to just refer to briefly. The first is because of human error. It's really important to understand the science of human error, because human error in the Mark I brain is inevitable. It is not a moral question. And actually, when you see reports which say the cause of this railway accident or this disaster in theatre was due to human error, this is wrong, naive, and insufficient. It demands an explanation. And the real question is, why is this organization inadequate? Why is this organization and system not safe for fallible human beings to work in? Because we all have genius in our brain, but we also have fallibility. The commonest human errors in all high-risk industries are the same: perception, assumption, and communications. And I'm going to just illustrate this by asking for the help of Peter Sellers.
You have a license?
Monsieur?
City Ordinance 47B prohibits the playing of any musical instrument in a public place for the purpose of commercial enterprise without a license.
I don't understand.
It is against the law for you to play your musical instrument.
The law?
What?
You say is against the law?
Yes, unless you have a proper license.
What kind of license?
A license that permits the playing of any musical instrument in a public place for the purpose of commercial enterprise.
Commercial enterprise?
Yes. You play that thing and people give you the money.
People give the monkey the money.
It is the same.
Oh, not at all, monsieur. I am a musician and the monkey is a businessman. He doesn't tell me what to play and I don't tell him what to do with his money.
Monsieur, don't try to be funny with me. He is your monkey, therefore it is your money.
He lives with me, but he is not my monkey. One day I came home and I found him sitting in the living room. I let him stay, but he pays for his own room and board.
Then the monkey is breaking the law.
But he doesn't play any musical instrument.
City Ordinance 132R prohibits the begging.
How do you know so much about city ordinances?
What sort of stupid question is that? Are you blind?
Yes.
Oh, I see, yes. Yes, of course. Well, you happen to be talking to a police officer. And because I expect to be transferred back to the detective division at any moment, I will let you off this time with just a warning.
Thank you, Monsieur Argent.
But you must get yourself a proper license.
First thing tomorrow.
Try to do something about your filthy monkey. was I to know he was the bank manager?
How were you to know the bank was being robbed?
That is...
Well, that's a real example of how we can fail. And the question is, how is it that he was so task-focused that he failed to notice the main event? Well, we all do that. The second topic I've chosen under this heading is because of our personality, for which read behavior, because behavior drives our personality drives our behavior, and it is failures of our safety behavior which are most correctable. We, all of us, have heroic strengths, and if you were appointing a new colleague to your department, I'm sure you'd like someone like this: diligent, charming, confident, shrewd, focused, careful, independent, and imaginative. What a super person to have. As Hogan points out, all of these personality traits have additional side effects. The diligent is perfectionist, the charming manipulative, the confident arrogant, the shrewd mistrustful, the focused passive aggressive, the careful cautious, the independent detached, and the imaginative really eccentric. So our question with regard to behavior is, can the leopard change its spots? Can we make perfect people?
The objective isn't to make perfect people, it's to keep those mistakes from hurting people. Pilots make mistakes, but planes don't crash very often. We want to do the same in medicine.
So the third topic I want to mention is, we make mistakes because of our experience. The mistakes of experts are quite distinct from those of novices. Hippocrates, 400 years before Christ, noticed that experience could be fallacious, leaving us with the wrong impression. Experts do make mistakes, but it may mean doing something wrong every time, and it's different from expertise, which is what we need, which means doing it right every time. Let's illustrate novices versus experts by this picture. Imagine this stream on Dartmoor. Imagine a family fun run, and imagine the novice, as perhaps an 8 or 10-year-old child going out with his dad, who's an athlete. The novice will go across this stream carefully from stone to stone, taking time to get to the other side, but probably safely. His dad, the athlete, will sprint across, probably missing out a few stones. And if we use the analogy of expert, there is a 5% chance of failure. He may be fast, and yet if he falls, he may well injure himself. We know from a study in primary care that this applies in that modality. We know that in this study, diagnosis of practitioners experienced to novices was 63%. We also know that systems are needed to prompt the imperfection and the fallibility of the human brain and memory. It was found that experienced doctors sought fewer clues, they got there quicker, but their experience did not improve accuracy. Their accuracy was the same as novices, actually, but it took less time. So that's the third reason. Experience can be dangerous, because it's mostly instinctive. The fourth topic under this heading is because of System 1 decision-making. Those of you who've read Daniel Kahneman's book on thinking fast and slow will be familiar with this. Because in decision-making, we have System 1, which is fast, automatic, and easy. It's similar to going to a party, seeing a beautiful girl, falling immediately and deeply in love. And System slow, it's slow, it's laborious and difficult. It's thinking about, what are they like in the longer term? Are they mentally stable? What's her mother like? System 1, therefore, fast, automatic, and easy, but the catch is it is instinctive and it feels right. It does not invite us to review that decision. It's uncontrollable, ineducable, and it comes with blind spots.
Yes, my little yellow friend. I knew the chief would have to reconsider. He did not get where he is by ignoring a man's qualifications. He knows that I am unique and therefore indispensable. We are much the same, the chief and I. But of course, Kato, all great detectives have one thing in common, and you know what that is? Instinct. That rare ability to know immediately without having to stop and reason. And in my business, it can easily mean the difference between life and death. All right, I get it. Thank you. Yes, that split-second timing when instinct tells you that...
The wave of assassination. Opposition spokesman has cut a...
Well, you can see System 1 in operation there, and it took a while for System 2 to cut in. Now, what is the context? When are we most likely to use System 1? Well, actually, when we're in a good mood, when we're using our intuition, when we're creative, but also when we are gullible. System 2, on the other hand, is associated with a degree of suspiciousness, vigilance, an analytical approach, and increased effort, and that's the problem. It takes real effort. And with a good mood, System 2 is weaker. So actually, most cognitive errors like this arise in the easy case, where people think they're operating on one thing and they're somewhere else. Experts and team working. Now, experts have, as we've seen, fast and frugal diagnostic strategies. They are less likely to review their decision, and you need a second brain. And this is the whole cognitive basis for the advantage of teamwork. But you've got to be able to listen to that second brain. Because in a crisis, experts develop tunnel vision and overload. And they need support from another less involved colleague. Now, you may notice something unusual about this crocodile. This is a question for you. It's a question about blame. This vet was called to examine the crocodile, who was sick and hadn't eaten for 6 days. This meal he had of the vet's right arm was probably the first one that he'd had. And the question is, how do you view that? Is this just an example of veterinary incompetence? Was it an accident? Was he impatient? Was the anesthetic wrong? Was the crocodile pretending all the time? We need to think about this carefully because it has implications for how we view our own mistakes. And as Sidney Dekker says, it's important not to blame individuals for what went wrong. It's a hopeless thing. It's not a solution. But to understand why what they did at the time made sense to them, because that opens the door to our understanding of the process and the conditions which produced that error. The next question is what works and why don't we use it? Well, we know what works from 3 decades of research in other industries. Now, I know that, as shown in this slide from which Peter Stevenson has given me, doctors can remove the wrong kidney. Pilots can shut down the wrong engine, as they did in the Kegworth disaster. And surgeons may react against being told what to do by people who fly aeroplanes. But the important thing is to remember this is not about learning about aeroplanes. This is about learning about the function of the Mark I human brain when faced with a number of cognitive challenges. There's a big difference in the outcome because, I won't go into the details, but when we look at airline safety versus medical care, there are huge opportunities for error, 10 million in a USA study over 5 years, and during that time there were 3 million over preventable deaths in medical care, where there were no deaths in the airline business. And even today, the latest data shows we've only 1 crash in 3.1 million flights worldwide. So despite the newspaper headlines, they're very safe. How is this possible? Not by preventing errors. You can't do that. You can minimize them, but you can't prevent them. You must accept that the best humans will make errors. You must minimize mistakes, but you need to create systems to identify and trap mistakes using collegiate, interactive teamwork. And only healthcare, among all the high-risk industries, has resisted the adoption of these principles in a systematic way.
There's a modern view of so-called high-reliability organizations. It's based on studies of organizations that are able to perform with extremely high fidelity under very stressful circumstances. High-reliability organizations don't assume they'll succeed. They assume that hazards and risks lurk everywhere. So they're always surveillant. They're not relaxed. A second is an acceptance of complexity, a reluctance to simplify. Simple explanations aren't generally accurate ones, not in high reliability environments either. They're complex causal systems, and these places are avid to understand them. A third characteristic is resilience. A capacity at the sharp end to adjust at the moment, because look, the hazards, they pop up and they go away. You need this kind of local autonomy and ability to act swiftly. Another characteristic is sensitivity to operations. This is flatness in organization, where the senior leaders, the executive, knows what's happening in the workplace. The last property is sort of, it's a kind of democratization property. They call it deference to expertise. And the theory is, in a high reliability organization, the problem moves around until it finds the person or the mind that has the answer, and it doesn't matter where in the hierarchy they are. It's as valuable if that answer comes from an ensign as from the admiral, and this willingness to draw on the resource of knowledge throughout the organization, another property. These are cultural characteristics and explain a lot more about whether a place is going to succeed or not under stress than what the manual says, or whether the CEO has given the right speech.
This is Don Berwick, who is another of my heroes and knows more about this than anyone else in the world, I think. Let's just take one thing that he said, not simplifying things which are complex. If you want a good example of that, think about the way in which the checklist, which was a theoretically good thing to do, was introduced by mandate, by the MPSA, who didn't really understand it. Now, if you've been a pilot, you've been obliged to learn about the risks and benefits of the checklist. You've been obliged to learn about the ways in which it can let you down. You've been obliged to learn that it needs to be occasionally adapted, modified to your own team, your own discipline, to be owned by the team. And it needs the leadership of people who believe in it and understand it to make it effective. It is not a tick box exercise. In fact, organizationally, it should be a tick box exercise, because if the notes aren't there when you want to start, it's a sign of a safety failure upstream in the organization which needs to be fixed. So this different view of the checklist is something I'd commend to you. It should not be something imposed on you without your understanding and collaboration. We've learned lessons from lots of areas, but when we were at Great Ormond Street, we learned lessons from Formula One pit stops in aviation, and we applied the Formula One pit stop scenario to the problem of the handover of the post-operative cardiac surgical baby from the 5 teams in theatre to the 5 teams in the recovery room. Involved changing lines and briefing and debriefing your opposite number, a really complicated process. And we used the principles that we had acquired from industry, process organization, teamwork, threat and error management, systems improvement, in other words. Now, it wasn't surprising that we encountered some resistance from the staff who did this. They said, oh, it's fine as it is, we've always done it like this, we don't have time to do it as you suggest. It might make things worse, so many other things are wrong, surgery isn't like motor racing. But we worked with them and we explained some of the rationale, and we took them to understanding that they were in charge and it was their suggestions and modifications that counted. And after a study, we showed that the number of errors during handover was reduced, the information omissions were reduced, and the duration was reduced. And it was pretty simple, really. One of the most important things was, don't try to change the lines and tubes while you're talking to your opposite number. Do one thing at a time. It's much more effective, and it's quicker. And they said at the end of this is great, but we can make it better. They now had the skills of a high reliability culture, and they were converted in their thinking. So the question is, why don't we use all this stuff, which has been known for 30 years? Well, actually because, and you can see this by looking at the way that politicians have a knee-jerk response to the 2 things they're concerned about in the health service, money and scandals. And most of their responses over the last 60 years have been inadequate solutions to those fundamental problems. They have confident but uninformed leadership. And they don't know what they don't know. And that's a criticism that can apply to us, particularly as we get older and we develop delusions of adequacy. So what leadership is required? Well, we need to have leaders who understand the science. And if you want a quick tutorial, please read the Berwick report. It's only 45 pages long. And if you've only got time for one page, read box 1, page 17. It's on a handout at the Foundation stall in the Exhibition Centre, or we'll email them to you together with a number of notes on this presentation for your reference. So the science must be taken into account. Leaders we need who have abandoned faith in blame and traditional methods that don't work. Mark Twain said, belief is faith. And faith is really believing in something you know isn't true. And that's a bit the same with the way in which we've repeatedly tried the same ineffective solutions to safety problems in political scene and in healthcare. And we need to have leaders who demonstrate belief in the ethical values of practice. If they had introduced the checklist bearing in mind the ethical values of patient priority, it might have had a different history.
The critical ingredient to transformational change in quality and safety is leadership. The leaders drive the values drive the behaviors drive the performance of the organization.
Let's just take those thoughts a little bit further. I'm sorry. Will we play the video, please?
The primary issue is leadership. Leadership drives the values of the organization. Those values drive the behavior of individuals. Their behavior drives the performance of the system. And that drives the outcomes. This chain of cause and effect is as certain as gravity, and attempts to change behaviors without first addressing issues of leadership and values are doomed to fail.
So if your leaders' values are those of artificial targets, not related to your clinical priorities, they may be effectively leading you down the wrong route. What can you do tomorrow? My last question. Well, a few simple suggestions. Ask why rather than blame, and particularly rather than self-blame, which is so corrosive and unhelpful. Make it easy to do the right thing. That's a basic principle of human factors stuff. Make it easy for people to work in the right way. Don't imagine that training people to speak up is really effective, because the culture of our organizations are hierarchical. And it's up to the people at the top of the hierarchy to listen down if you're going to get the advantage of the second brain. Share your mistakes. They needn't be your serious mistakes. They could be simple mistakes, but there's nothing so empowering as a new member of your team than pointing out that you are human, you are fallible too, and you want to be honest. So you want to create psychological safety within your team. And you finally must celebrate the unsung heroes who make care safe every day, because they are unsung, because they see things about to go wrong and they intervene. They stop the bad things happening, and yet they're never recognized. And you've got thousands of them in the National Health Service doing that every day. It's important. That's where safety really lies.
Great doctors are not the ones that never make errors. Rather, they are people who expect errors to happen and who have strategies in place to cope with them before these adverse events could cause harm to a patient.
So, finally, what about productivity? The evidence shows that if you improve safety, you improve productivity. And, of course, you reduce cost. And my final hero or heroine is a lady from Sweden.
We have seen in prosthesis surgery in orthopedics a reduction by 30% in adverse events, a reduction by 15 to 20% in re-operation frequency, but we have increased productivity by 50%.
So this is really the answer. Safety is not an add-on or an extra skill. It is the strategy. So in summary, human error is normal. It is not a moral question. Blame and political remedies don't work. We don't need to blame the politicians. Their world is not ours. Their values are not ours. we have the benefit of the sanctity of the individual relationship with every patient. They don't have that. We need to exercise our influence in that sphere. The science of systems and people does put together the genius and fallibility of the human brain with a system which has reliability and scope to correct our mistakes and errors. We need empowered and informed leadership. One of the problems about so much central political direction is that it has disenfranchised, it has demotivated and disempowered the work that consultants in my training days used to do to set the cultural tone for the service. It is a huge side effect we should resist. Science can improve safety and productivity, free us from inappropriate guilt, and give us lasting professional fulfillment. So I'd just like to say that the real voyage of discovery consists not of seeking new lands, but of seeing with new eyes. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Tony. I think that's a fantastic lecture, and if it's helped many of us in the room be a little bit more careful, then it's probably the most important lecture you'll hear during this week. Well, we don't have questions after the TUF lecture, but we do have a vote of thanks, and it's my job to do that. But I also like to mention how important TUF is as a charity. We've got Louise De Winter. Just stand up, Louise, so everybody knows who you are. I know you don't like doing that, but do. Louise is our CEO, and with Serena and Ollie there in the front row as well. They're only a small team, but last year they raised more than £1 million, and perhaps more importantly, they spent more than £1 million too. So we raise money, but we don't keep it. We spend it on projects like James Green, who's over there by microphone number 1's important project in improving safety and improving training for young urologists. Hope we'll be able to report those results from that study perhaps next year. So avoid making mistakes. I think quite a few people in this room will remember the wrong kidney being removed in Wales and all the trouble associated with that. I had dinner with David Sellu, the surgeon who went to Belmarsh prison for 18 months because he failed to diagnose peritonitis and operated too late, and his whole life has been ruined by that single mistake. He's a great chap, and it's a tragedy. So I think we all have to be more careful. I think those messages that Tony has just given us are fantastic. So I think a round of applause, please, for Tony and for TUF, the charity. Thank you.